We're now getting to our last session for today, and it's really wonderful to have with us this year Prasad, Shetty and Rupali Gupte, especially because a lot of other practitioners work with them very closely, and we've all sort of been familiar with the type of work they've been doing, since it also crosses into so many different fields that we as curators sort of need to pick their brain and at least reference their work even from a distance for. So it's really wonderful to have them here to speak about their practice in an expanded way. They're urbanists based in Mumbai and also teach at the School of Environment and Architecture, which they co-founded as an experimental academic space for architecture and urbanism. In 2003, they co-founded an urban research network, CRIT. Rupali and Prasad are also architects and specialize in urban design and urban management. As I was mentioning, some of these sort of works and collaborations have included Manifesta 7, studies of housing types in Mumbai, Being Nicely Messy, a proposition for the future of urban mobility, which was shown in Istanbul, Gurgaon Glossaries, a methodology to read cities, which took place at Sarai in Delhi, at Mumbai Art Room, and at the Sao Paulo Architecture Biennale. Their work, Transactional Objects, which is an art installation that was shown at the 56th Venice Art Biennale. I was very excited to be able to write on this work, and it was also a work that they showed recently at Project 88 in Mumbai. R&R is a library and community center built in a rehabilitation colony in Mankurd in collaboration with Camp and Khana Badosh. They also did the spatial design for the Shanghai Biennale. I could go on and on, but this is sort of the kind of field of work that has happened in sort of the last couple of years. So thank you so much, and we look forward to your sharing.
Yeah. Thanks, Natasha, and thank you, Priyanka and Pratik, for inviting us to this idea. As Natasha said, this is this is a practice that we present where we do many things: run a school, teach, tell stories, plan, do architecture, and also curation. What we'll do is we'll take you through some of our current ideas and what we are doing as current research, and end with the Jawahar Kala Kendra exhibition that we did 3 months ago, which is an architectural exhibition. So we got interested in cities long ago, and these are the only two maps that I will show. The very conventional kind of understanding of Indian cities is more or less like this. It's this optic that you kind of zoom out and you kind of look, and it's basically, it basically says in the past 30 years more than 3,000 new cities have been added. Now, when I say new cities, it means a particular census definition in terms of population density and working population. And there are, out of these 3,000 new cities, there are more than 50 million plus cities that have been added. So these are the numbers that one often talks about when one speaks of Indian urbanization. The other thing that one speaks about is the kind of an unwieldy growth of large cities. The first, so this is the first 12 million is the population of the city, and 20 million is the population of the region. Similarly, Delhi is 11 and 25, Bangalore is 8 and 10, and Kolkata itself is 40 municipalities. So these are the two kind of things that one speaks about when one speaks about Indian urbanization, actually. So one is, there are many cities that have come up, and existing cities have kind of grown in size either becoming a functional urban region with many cities and villages, or expanding their municipal boundaries. When we started looking closely at what is really happening on with these cities, we found something something very interesting actually. One thing was that this is of course the case of Bombay, but also in other large cities. You see that that in the past 20 years, the population of large cities has been lesser than the national average. The growth of population of large cities have been lesser than the national average, which means city urbanization kind of reduces population. It's kind of a known thing. But large cities are not really growing in terms of population. They're actually lesser than even the natural growth in population. So really, there are no migrants coming into these cities. They may be coming to the peripheries, but not to these cities. But there are other two things happening. There is definitely a rise in the number of establishments. So in Bombay itself, establishments have grown by 60%. So which means there is number of businesses, small entrepreneurs, agents, they have increased. There's no labor. There is increase in the number of establishments. And one very clear thing is happening is number of trips that happen in the city, movement that happens in the city, that has increased. So the nature of work has changed. And so what we feel the city today is not really the is a density, but what we feel is the intensity. The intensity of movement and intensity of variety of kinds. The Bombay case very clearly is the moving out of the industries and replaced by this very small fragmented entrepreneurial enterprises. So for example, the black box of the industry gets fragmented, and as it gets fragmented, you see that the movement which used to be north-south has become more complicated, and that's what you feel as everyday traffic and stuff like that. And this kind of this kind of starts kind of telling us about who is this urban person actually, who is this urban entity. And one sees, of course, there's a big rise of entrepreneurial practices of all kinds. This is 2005, floods, and this is basically an advertisement for a loan in a railway station. So each of these entrepreneurs, to illustrate the intensity, each of these small enterprises will require its own money, it will require its own space, it will require its own kind of agency to kind of be there, its own chartered accountant and all of those things. So it kind of just multiplies in terms of the nature of things that happen. So, and we can talk about it much more in detail because each of this is kind of a presentation by itself. But very clearly there is an emergence of an autonomous, mobile, innovative, and an unpredictable work entity that takes place in the city. And this work entity has a spatial consequence. The spatial consequence is being seen, one, of course, in the co-working spaces. You'll have you have people kind of increasing number of co-working spaces across the country. In Bombay, we have the renting of a table space. You can rent a table space for 3 hours and 6 hours and stuff like that. You have flexible working spaces even in a place like Bandra complex, which was conceived as a traditional CBD. And of course, you have specific women intern and student housing, which is like very specific kind of housing which is getting produced, and numerous of these kinds. One thing very clear with the demography is also that if the population is not rising, if the population is kind of, nobody is coming to these large cities, then 2030, 2040 is basically are the decades of old age, and you see that the city will be an elderly city in the next 25-30 years, and well, there are responses to this. Mysore, Srirangapatnam, parts of Hyderabad, outskirts, they're all kind of responding to it. Numerous schemes of how do you kind of deal with old age, life. Mysore, of course, also has a high proliferation of yoga places. It's this new emerging dimension, contexts which are replacing the earlier ideas of habitability, affordability, and tenure security. Now, housing, for example, infrastructure has its own kind of imperatives, but housing, which was conventionally thought as the problem, the context of housing was thought as habitability, affordability, and tenure security, seems to be replaced by newer contexts. The context of work, particularly, the context of movement, and all kinds. For example, Gurgaon over here, Gurgaon is very, very interesting. It has, it has demands like buildings only required for nurses. You have many. So you have very interesting kind of new, built landscapes. This is again Gurgaon. 300 rupees rent house for a migrant. Gurgaon is the most migrant-friendly city at the moment, actually. This is Mangalore. Mangalore is replaced by the old port, old BD, old cashew nut tile making. That is gone, and then what is replaced is Bangalore. Every 200 meters there is an engineering college. So Mangalore is kind of is becoming a city of students, actually, and it has its own kind of dynamics because of that. Mangalore has also another thing. It has a lot of money coming from remittance. So you have a huge number of skyscrapers like this which are empty, bought for investment purposes. This is the outskirt of, this is Sri Perumbudur. Sri Perumbudur is interesting because after 91, a huge amount of industries were planned and they came up. Hyundai, Nokia, Samsung, and that brought in a specific type of labor, and that created a large market, which is not people who would stay there, but a huge rental economy around. So if you have land in outskirts of Sri Perumbudur, you can get a house built like this, and somebody can invest on that house and give it to a company which will rent it for you. So there's this kind of practices which are also emerging. So basically this is the broad scape of what we are observing. Closer, what exactly happens in the mechanics of urban form is something which we were interested in quite some time.
Yeah, just move the slide. Okay.
This one.
Okay, so just to kind of go ahead with what Prasad was talking about, one of our practices is really looking closely at the urban and what kind of questions emerge from it. So if you look at this is typically a development plan of Mumbai, and if we see, these are plots. So these are single lines that kind of delineate property boundaries. But if we actually go closer, that single line is really not just a single line, but it's actually a corroded line. And so if we see this, there are 4 layers of that line, right? So for example, there's the building there, that's the chawl. In front of that, at the bottom there are shops, but shops have extensions. And then you have series of these, which we call the 1-foot shops. So it's only a foot wide, and in some ways pays some kind of nominal rent to the shop behind, but also operates independently completely. And then you have the series of hawkers that are right in front of it. But also there's one other layer of people who are the homeless, who are in some ways taking care of the wares when they're left behind in the night. So, I mean, really it's that corroded edge, and that corroded edge is what we are interested in. It's basically, we say that these are blurred edges, and that urban form of the city is blurred, and that's the logic of the city. And this is another kind of blur. This is a house, this is a chawl, and if you see, this is an old couple that lives here. And this old person here is bedridden for 3 years, but the only way he can actually survive in this place is because that house is actually a porous house. You have series of people actually walking in and out of that house, and there's a whole sense of security that is built through the porosity of that house itself. So if you look at this, this is actually an interesting, I mean, these are kind of objects that then really kind of contribute to the porosity and the kind of the double nature of the house. So for example, if we see this one, okay, I'll just go back. This door is actually a door that shuts the kitchen cabinet, but also shuts the living room space. And there's a similar cabinet that is on the outside, which also then shuts the door outside, the main door of the house. And in doing so, it's like this Duchampian door, right, which works in both ways. But in doing so, it kind of creates this porosity of the house. Sorry, I think I'm going back. So yeah, and then this is the living room. This is actually, it's the corridor space outside where people hang out, and it's actually an extended living room. So I mean, this is really this is a drawing. So that's the house. That's really tiny, but then the doors on both sides are open, and that's the corridor space. That's the bridge space that we just saw, right? And if we just sort of look closer, this is that bridge space, and it becomes an extended living room, right? So this kind of porous house becomes one large house. So I mean, in some ways, this is the thesis then that we bring from these examples of cities, that that urban form of cities provide what we call transactional capacities, and transactional capacities being the capacity to afford flows of all kinds, bodies, commodities, money, security, kinship relationships, care, all of these things. And if we look at from the incremental settlement of cities to that skyscraping urban form, what is really kind of in inverse relationship is the transactional capacities are much higher here, whereas the resource that is consumed is much lower, and then it kind of inverts on the other side. But also what is kind of reducing is the blur. The blur is much stronger here, and the blur sort of completely reduces on that side, becomes very hard edged. And this is really something that's going on. This is the case of Mumbai, but you'll find that the Mumbai model is something that is kind of repeated everywhere, where these are redeveloped. There's a whole redevelopment model. These are redeveloped into these are redeveloped into these and that. So that's one of the things that we're saying, that there's kind of cellularization of life that is going on. This is really the kind of mosaic of the logic that we just saw. And that's really what we are turning into, these kind of very hard-edged boundaries that are in some ways kind of, getting rid of that blur that kind of provided the transactional capacity to cities, and kind of hardening them into these kind of hard edges. And really what that is doing, this is a kind of resettlement colony in Mankhurd, where the buildings are so close to each other, and there's very strong compound walls that kind of completely in some ways get rid of that blurred logic of the city, and that's really creating a fractured city today. And this is very quickly talking about this one particular project. It was called Being Nicely Messy, And this is when we were invited to look at the future of mobility in Mumbai. And I mean, one of the things we said is mobility is not transport. It's the ability of people to kind of, be mobile in the city. And the other thing we said is, it was on the future of mobility. We said the future can no longer be this modern concept of one future, one vision, but there are a series of conditions in the city. And we really have to think of the idea of multiple futures then, the possibility of participating in multiple futures. And so then what we did is, instead of creating one kind of vision, one model, what we did is we created series of tools which people could kind of build, could use to engage in making these multiple futures. So there were all kinds of tools, from retrofitting of old houses, to the greening of landscapes, to a senior. Prasad talked about the idea of the future being that of senior citizens, the older people really going to be the citizens of tomorrow. So what is the senior city? A catalog for senior citizens, and then an enterprise catalog that is almost like yellow pages to really look at new ideas of enterprises. And it went on, and in some ways this was one of our, it was a curatorial project for us, because it's impossible for one person to think of these multiple futures. So we invited all kinds of people to participate in this project, to, friends who kind of made, each of those tools to then engage with the future. And this was presented actually in Istanbul, and this whole idea of the city of many futures,
Is this South?
Sorry?
South Space? Where is this?
This was in, it was a factory. What was that? It was an old factory that was, I'll remember the name of the place. But yeah, so the idea of, multiple futures, and it was supposed to be a city dossier, and this was our city dossier, this idea of a city of multiple futures and multiple tools. And then we really started looking closely again at the urban form of the city, that blur, and one saw that, the entrepreneurs were actually starting to locate themselves in various places. So this is the compound wall of a building, with the closet really kind of embedded into the wall. And then, multiple other ways in which people were occupying space. So for example, this was a shop inside a shop, a typist shop inside a lawyer's shop. And really, again, this whole idea of, we talk about GIS and, big data. And really the GIS requires very clear polygons that kind of demarcate property. And really, what do you do when you have a shop inside a shop? How do you really look at this idea of GIS? And then the stop under the staircase, and this was what we call the 1 foot shop. Yeah, okay, 10 minutes. Okay, so I very quickly go through this. So this is what we then did for the Venice Biennale. There was the idea of all the world's futures. So one of the propositions for the future is that the future is not out there. It's not a utopian, something that is out there, but it's really kind of one step ahead of what already exists. So this whole idea of the 1 foot shop really multiplying space. It's kind of, it opens up its arms and kind of multiplies space. And then there's the day and night 1 foot shop. So if you see this, the shutter closes and the things are located on the outside. So the night shop takes over when the shutter of the day shop closes. And so we did this, which was the 1 foot shop became these 2 6-inch shops, which kind of operated in ways. And then this is the inner city, where the porters carry these large baskets, and then also use them to sleep. So what we did is we kind of just slightly enlarged the basket till it becomes a comfortable space to sleep. Yeah, and then this was the shop which actually occupies the ground only at one point, and so occupies very little city space. And so we did this, which was also occupies the space at the city at 3 points, but can be rolled away when there's a raid. So the staircase shop under the staircase. Yeah, and then we made series of, this was at Seoul, at the Seoul Architecture Biennale, where we made series of these models which really became propositions for the future. And then this was at Mumbai at Project 88, where we made these kind of long serpentine table. It's kind of this agile table which actually occupies these propositions. So yeah, and then very quickly I'll talk about R&R. Because this is again then the next extension to the idea of transactions. This is that Mankhurd space that we talked about, and really this is the little gallery, the library that we built, which also, I mean, that's the space there. Working with series of people who are actually, I mean, they're working. There's Kurla is one of the largest recycling centers, and we had series of people who actually came from there and already had this artisanal logic of actually working with reusing material. And so a lot of this material is from Kurla, and then we built this. In some ways, it's also kind of a porous legal space because they had this one document which allowed the BMC not to come and demolish the place. And so in some ways, it was also a kind of experiment in building an encroachment in this place. And then these are the series of people who are actually engaged. There's Camp and there's Khana Badosh, but then also series of people who actually kind of helped build the place. And so in some ways, really talking about Abdul Malik Simon and we're saying the idea of people as infrastructure. You know, how do you actually really look at this logic of building a place through multiple people? And so in some ways, these are also, you know, kind of steps towards the idea of curation for us, you know, like the idea of curatorial logic. And I think we'll just kind of end with this last project, Venice Space,
1 minute.
for 5 minutes.
1 minute. Sorry. Yeah. I'll just show the slide, that's all. Yeah. So,
Okay, 7 minutes.
so meanwhile, while we were doing all this, we also started a school of architecture because primarily we felt that there is a, you know, you need an institutional space to kind of do these experiments. And then one of the things that we do is we invite these young architects to kind of set up a pavilion. So this is a pavilion that we, you know, got made. This is basically, this is paper structure which was kind of built. And then we were invited to Jawahar Kala Kendra to kind of, you know, do an exhibition on Korea. And then, of course, there are 200 books on Korea and 100 videos. So no point in kind of, you know, doing it. So we proposed that why don't we kind of use the ideas of Korea and speak about contemporary architecture. So the other question that we were asking is, you know, we were also in Jaipur, so there were imperatives of using, you know, Jai Singh and Jaipur and all of those things. So, but the question that we were asking is, how are these guys building? Because Jaipur is also the first city of North India which uses a grid, which has a grid, which is it's a grid city, and there's a lot of speculation of where did the grid come from actually, and of course, you know, you have the Jantar Mantar, you have these forts and all kinds of things which were basically. So how are they building it before cartography, before, you know, before modern ways of drawing things? And then we found these drawings from the City Palace archive, and these drawings are basically some very basic, you know, diagrams, but annotated with a lot of proportioning systems written as poems. So basically a drawing kind of goes from one person to another person, and the person kind of interprets and keeps on building and rebuilding. So the whole building comes up with multiple architects. And this was fascinating for us. And then we used both Jai Singh's way of kind of, you know, thinking of architecture and Korea's strategies, and we called this as we kind of, you know, we use this as provocation to invite whom we call as practitioners of space, artists as well as architects, to kind of respond to the architecture of Jawahar Kala Kendra, which itself is, you know, a very modern kind of building. So of course, you know, I won't go through all this, but what these friends of ours actually, and this is really the kind of idea of collaboration that we kind of push, this whole idea of friendship that kind of that gets built over time, and these friendships have multiply themselves, and you become a part of this large collaborative work. And we invited them to inhabit various spaces of Jawahar Kala Kendra. So there were people who were kind of working with logic of thinking of space. This exhibition was on space. So so these were experiments on about creating and about speculating on space and form. So there were people who were kind of, you know, thinking of how do you imagine space through a newer logic. So for example, Jai Singh's drawings created a certain kind of architecture, the colonial cartography created a certain kind of architecture, a computational way of drawing and thinking will create a different kind of architecture. So there were people experimenting with that, people asking questions of, of the elements of space. How does a line become space? How do illusions, and again, when you twist the grid, what happens actually? So this is Teja actually, who twisted some of these grid lines and created this very beautiful piece. People kind of using absurd logics and thinking of geography and cartography in completely different ways. This is M. Pravat's work under the Jain cosmology, which kind of which became a part of the work. There were people who were asking questions on the boundaries of space. So this was a floating roof, which was the entry to the project. Another roof, which is basically nothing but really looking at the idea of the pandal, where the pandal is basically a stretched fabric. When you use the fabric differently, you use it in certain intensity, allow light to pass through it, allow wind to move it, then you create another kind of space. That is Abhin Chaudhary from here. Abhin Chaudhary, yeah. Abhin. So he uses this is the same paper pavilion that we took there, and we kind of it was called Five Gardens. There is this group from Ahmedabad which kind of changed land. It kind of created a new terrain and kind of modulated land. Inhabitation of a wall, through the idea of claim. So many practices which we thought as practices of space. The way in which space happens. What is the way in which space happen? When does it happen? When is space? So that was the kind of question that we were asking. There were projects which were basically looking at this is a bed seat. So you can sleep on it, you can sit on it, you can do a number of things actually. This is this office which looks at very small, tiny places and creates these very beautiful furniture. This is an interesting project. This is a set of toilets. This office kind of got obsessed with designing toilets. For the last 3 years, they've been only thinking of toilets and kind of they were designing toilets of all kinds. Public toilets, yeah. And in fact, government of Rajasthan has now employed them to build some 40 toilets across Jaipur. So, and then this is Bhagwati's, huge, drawing on one of the huge surface, of Jawahar Kala Kendra, talking about the underground, talking of infrastructure. So this was. I mean, I can go on and on this, but the point that I'm making is this is an investigation into looking at space, the idea of space very closely, how it is kind of the mechanics of how space happens actually. Reading, and we read this piece called Nishastaga. This is Samsher, a friend who wrote the piece as well as read it, about the idea of how a non-claimed space kind of becomes a part of the city. Each of the works were also annotated with because that thickness was required, and each of the piece was also kind of annotated with quotations from Korea, but also quotations from one of the 5 historians that we referred to from Jaipur. These really kind of opening up the works in a variety of ways. So this is Korea's original drawing, and this is what we did of corroding that plan. So we occupied this plan like this. Now with 30 artists and architects. Now currently we are doing a studio with art school in at sea, which is basically putting together this mystery piece with 20 students on gorilla retrofits, and that is again an investigation into form and the future of form. So in each of these projects there are multiple people involved, and in multiple ways we kind of get involved, and that has been the practice so far. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. It felt like we went through, it was a real lesson. So thank you for sort of really educating us in a way in terms of all of your approaches. And just trying to think, because there's always this constant sort of updating of also the vocabularies, and if I think also of the project like the Gurgaon glossaries or sort of the hyper mapping practices, just trying to think one of what is the process of sort of translating some of this just among your sort of group of students, and how do you continue and to kind of keep up yourselves actually with this shift in the lexicon, the spatial lexicon and the sort of lexicon of language. Yeah.
The idea has always been to kind of make sense. And every time we kind of thought that we kind of held the city, it kind of moved between the fingers. It's like it was, and with every new layer of observation, material, the story changed, and that's why incoherence. Every time you made sense, kind of the new dimension came and it changed the whole reading, and every reading required you to kind of take a different tactically kind of shift position, shift gears, do a different methodology and work differently. So therefore these multiple ways of engaging, and this has been kind of there has been it is exhausting. It's kind of it moves very quickly also, but every new engagement kind of offers its own layer, and the new people kind of, for example, the library at the moment, it's highly contested because we built it in such a way that it cannot be demolished. The bulldozer cannot enter, so it's built like that. It's an encroachment. Now the thing is that now it's become a very expensive space. It's become a very nice space. So there are many people who are kind of contesting it, and that's another thing that it's not that beautiful community space. It's kind of many there are many people who have got interested in this. So that will kind of change the work and change the next engagement. Mm-hmm. So it's a city which kind of keeps on throwing new things at you, and then you constantly have to kind of juggle.
Yeah, I just to kind of. Yeah, it also came from our own kind of practice, which I think almost 15 years ago started off as a traditional, architectural, urban design kind of practice. But then we realized that, it's not possible to think of the city like that. I mean, we were working as young students, we were working with Charles Correa on the mill lands of Mumbai. And it was like, there was this plan, and you saw that suddenly we'd drawn out all the mill spaces, and Charles Correa looks at the plan and says, oh, wow, that's, so much open space. Yeah, so it's like just seeing that cartographic plan in that particular way showed that there were these big spaces, and so the plans were designed as these large classical urban spaces. Yeah, but the plan never worked. Yeah, it didn't work at various levels. And so then we started realizing that perhaps there you need another optic to start seeing the city through. You cannot see them through, the conventional ideas of urban design, architecture. And that's really where the lexicon starts kind of growing. And then with every project you realize, maybe there's something else, that we've missed and we haven't seen. And that's, I think, where the kind of engagement just kind of moves from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also just thinking about the kind of, because obviously as a curator, you have to also start to think about the kind of translation of these concepts and translation of, even a series like transactional objects. I'm just trying to think, since you all have shown it in so many contexts, if you could share a little bit of, was there any sort of trouble when there were sort of wider audiences? Were they really able to grasp? Because I imagine that the kind of tussle between corporate capitalism and informal sort of methodologies of encroachment or of jugaad, of sort of repair, or sort of repair, and at the same time of conviviality and all of this. I mean, there are these sort of specific practices that match certain kind of cartographies, and I just wonder, yeah, within contexts like Venice or in South Korea and Seoul, how do you translate the project? How does it grow?
I mean, the corporate space is also very, very incremental and thought of also very incrementally. Actually, it's not as if and modern planning ways and methods of thinking of space, which is where you fix up a design and then you kind of for example, a very big architectural office does a project for a developer in Bombay, but gets its scheme rendered from Shanghai, and then that plan is only used to kind of convince one section of people who will invest. Another plan is being made by some NGO. A third plan is being made by some licensing architect, and then finally what comes out is a lot of negotiation of how to increase your building space and FSI. So there is the building process is also very, very kind of incremental in all ways. So it's not as if the corporate understands it very, very well. So that is one thing. But there's an image issue. And these are kind of, these are issues. That's why I said that our discussions of architecture and planning have been hijacked and trapped in habitability, tenure security, affordability, and these issues. But whereas the cities are showing very completely different, demand cycles and very different contexts actually. So for example, in the housing situation itself, the Kundu Committee report 2012 says that there is 18 million housing shortage in the country, and then if you look at cities, you take the case of Karnataka, you required 15 lakh urban houses. In the last 10 years, the state is able to build only 1.5 lakhs. And this is a story everywhere, that if you want to build your way through, it will take another 100 years. It's not possible. It's not possible to kind of build your way through. So and it's not as if people are not living. In fact, the number of houseless people is less than 1%. It's not as if you. The way you look at the house and the way you kind of rethink the house, so there is a lot of space in that, and there are a lot of practices which are already going on. So we were and architectural practice has only looked at one specific way, and that's why the whole idea of how do you think and draw, and what are the modes and mechanics of thinking of space and drawing it up so as to build. So I think a modern methods of drawing architecture and planning has to kind of undergo substantial change to kind of intervene and engage with the emerging context actually.
I think. Okay. Said a lot. So.
Just curious, on your R&R project, you chose Kurla as a place willfully, or did you?
Yeah, I think again it is Mankot, but it also came out of our collaborations with series of people. So We had Simpreet, who's also part of camp, who had friends in Mankhurd, So we were also actually kind of going around the city to several places, and that's really somewhere. I mean, in some ways, all of us have really embedded practices in the city, and so we went through series of options, and then I think we landed up with Mankhurd in the end. Kurla is actually it's next door, which is one of the biggest real estate, recycling centers, which is So that's where we got the material from. But the site here is in Mankhurd.
Just want to make a short comment about the fractured city, and I just wanted to say how I see this like fractured, these projects, housing projects, settlement projects are like so much part of the growth of the right-wing populism, and how people are like kind of cubicled inside like certain spaces, and the porosity, as you also put very well, like kind of is cut. In Istanbul also, I don't know if you had visited, but like there's, in whole Turkey actually, there's an explosion of settlement projects all around, outside the cities, and really also defining family spaces and studio spaces, and like people to live in a very like particular, family model, 3 children, not working mother, and like this kind of really like a straightforward family structure they want to put on, is going through that. Like actually those housing structures, which made them rich, by the way, also by selling them all around. So this kind of works both as a capital, as a symbolic capital, and as a social capital. It's really something that I think this sovereignty builds on. These fractures, actually.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's only right-wing politics, because it's also in some ways the left, because you see it as a compensatory model. You're given housing, right. So you're given, there's a right. You're given a housing right, but the nature of the right is something that we don't understand. So you get a 20 square meter building which you can now own, an apartment which you can own. So in some ways, it's as a housing right, it is seen as something, you've kind of gone up on the social ladder. But if you look closely, really it's really not going up in the social ladder. In fact, sometimes the houses where you moved from were much better than the houses that you're now moving into. So I just want to say that it's, not only the right politics, but it's also...
I also agree with you. There's a kind of a blurry line between. Just one question I want to ask, how is this, when it comes to development, what is the politics of public-private investment that kind of goes on in hand? Because AKP in Turkey gave a very particular business model in the way they became rich. They had share with every public partnership, and that kind of really grew, the whole real estate and construction growth in the big cities, especially.
It's very market. For example, between 95 and 2005, private capital was kind of mobilized, and then suddenly 2005, 2006, government, everybody realizes that the real estate investment is really a bad investment. It's risky. It's very high risk. So government starts pumping in money, and then you have several schemes which public capital is mobilized. So it really kind of works with the banks and the market at that time. Just one more addition to that point, that actually we've seen high-rise buildings as rehabilitation buildings. You have all over the place also. The problem is not really from a low-rise to high-rise. The problem is that if the condition of house is good, if the network is maintained, if the living condition is kind of workable, then it's not a problem. What happens is when the shift happens, and this is another concept that we have been working with quite some time, the idea of settling. When you shift a lot of people to one space, it takes more than a generation for the people to come to terms with each other, you know, and there's the trust to develop and all of those things, and that you see across many cities of India. So whenever there's a large mass of people kind of move from one place to another place, there is a settling period, and this is not a very nice period that in that for the entire populations. So that is, and typically what happens is public sector government kind of, you know, the state looks turns its back to these settlements, and then it has its own logic, and we find that the earlier model where people were shifted to small land, well, land parcels were given. In 70s, land parcels were given. Now these houses are given. So there is that shift. So when the land parcel is given, things took 30 years. There a lot of things happened in those neighborhoods, but still there was a way in which the neighborhood kind of grew. In these new houses, there is no way it can change or undergo any, because these are fixed houses which are also very dilapidated. So as a form to shift large number of people, this is not the ideal. So it's a question of form we're constantly talking about, actually.
Hello, can I be heard? Hi, I'm Rosalind. I actually want to, because I'm from Bombay and I'm also from Kurla, like I'm from Kurla West. I mean, that's where I grew up and spent 22 years of my life, and I know that city I know my stations in Bombay. I don't need to look out. I can tell from the smell, like which station I've arrived at. I feel like there is maybe a lack of nuance, at least in this particular situation, of your use of the word porosity, because I feel like, having been in Bombay and having lived for so long in the city, there are still many problems with its housing, and I think I feel you've neglected to speak about, because I feel like it paints a slightly rosy picture for people who are not from here, and there are a lot of people in the audience who are not from Bombay, and there is this glorified image of Bombay as this migrant city, but it is also a city which has major caste issues. It is a city where if you are trying to rent an apartment in a Jain colony, you cannot cook non-veg, you cannot order non-veg food. If you are a woman, you can't even rent an apartment, and there's a lovely film, Bachelor Girls, which is about how women like me would have a really tough time renting an apartment in a place like Bombay. Then you have the Muslim and Hindu segregation, and I come from Kurla, which is primarily Muslim and Catholic, and and then very close by is the Gujarati side. So there is a ghettoization in Bombay that I feel nobody really talks about and nobody addresses, and certainly people who tend to write about Bombay tend to write about it as this glorious megalopolis, completely erasing all of these, problems and caste. Let's not forget caste in Bombay when it comes to that whole Kalina area, there's the whole Dharavi area, and when you have the Ambedkar festival, then you really see these kind of caste ruptures. And I feel sometimes in the way your discourse is positioned, at least in this particular instance, it really feels like you're glossing over many of those things. And I just felt like it was important to point that out.
Just three things. One is, you're absolutely right. All that you said was absolutely right. Just two things that, the hardening of edges between communities, between, various kind of peoples, various kinds of, groups. One sees the hardening happening and it becoming very, very aggressively different in the last 20 years. So there is a very specific time to it. The second thing is that what we are talking of is what it is moving towards, and what it is moving towards appears to be more problematic in terms of its that hardening of edges. So that is what we are talking about. And third and last thing is, as compared to other cities, I'm leaving away Calcutta because Calcutta is much better. As compared to other cities, particularly of the south and the north, Bombay is still different in terms of its way in which you can navigate and move and live and inhabit spaces. So I think what you're saying is absolutely right, but we are interested in what happens next.
Yeah, I mean it's so that's the thing. So when we talk about settling, one of the things that we say is that, I mean, it's abrasive. Living in cities is abrasive, and it's not like it's a cancelling out of. I mean, there's all kinds of, I mean, people grow up, abusing each other, and but the thing is that there is, what is happening today is this kind of polarization where that settling is also becoming impossible. So I think, when you talk about the Jain communities and all of that, that's something that's going on now with that kind of hardening of boundaries, the polarization, where we're not saying that everything that existed before, or that the city is really a kind of hunky-dory place to live in. It's very abrasive, yeah. But really, if you look at what's going on in terms of this new shift, yeah, I think that polarization is much, much more, and that's something that we are not seeing.
Okay, we need to take a couple of questions. Sorry, just a second. There actually have been a lot of...
This is actually related to what she said.
Just a second, please. Can you give the mic once?
I was just adding to what Rosalind was saying.
Okay, so since you have the mic, please make a very short comment and then we go at the back.
Okay.
You can if you want. No? Okay.
I think, I mean, just adding to what Rosalind was saying, a lot of it had to also do with how Shiv Sena actually found solidarity within a certain kind of a class, was by offering housing, but the housing was not offered in the same manner how the government offers you housing. They weren't in occupied spaces, which were just kind of traffic accumulation spaces. So housing within Bombay as a culture, and then a lot of times I also wonder that is that the reason, because a lot of times you actually see a lot of people from Bombay who are not conscious of caste. I mean, of course, Ambedkar comes in because Ambedkar Gardens and also that Dharavi situation is actually a part of urban planning. A lot of Ambedkar statues were set up within Indian cities so that the Dalit community was not removed. So that's why Ambedkar was made. So I mean, it's all a... Just a part of the urban planning.
At the back.
I just wanted to say that traditionally, even Indian villages, you always had the Muchi para and this para and that para. This caste division has always existed, and even in cities, in a liberal city like Kolkata, you do not have mixed populations in most places. You have Muslims in certain areas and middle class Bengali, Hindu in certain areas. So, those hard edges may not always be very visible, but they've always been there. Now it's only more aggressive.
It's not only traditional cities. When the first apartments came to India in the 1920s, it came to Bombay, and and the British kind of asked a lot of Brahmins to kind of enter, and Brahmins refused to enter. All upper castes actually refused to enter the apartment because how can you have the toilet inside? Who will clean it? So then the engineers had to work out a situation where you have two doors. So typically old apartments, 1920s, 1930s, if you see in Bombay, they have two doors, one for the family and one for the sink. But in IIT Chennai, which is 1970s, modern state, the seat of science, when it builds its apartments for teachers, it builds it with 3 doors. One for the... So it's not only that tradition, so it's kind of... because one for the men, one for the women, one for the people who kind of come to the kitchen to work, and one for the person who comes to clean the toilet. So one for the family, one for the person who kind of, works in the kitchen, one...
So Sabi, please start.
Okay, so well, this is slightly different register, but it was a question I wanted to ask with regard to your research methodology and the way you want to look at and understand and study form. Like, how do you, at least the kind of phenomena you're studying and even the way you like to present it, there's that incremental order. That duration's about incremental plateauing, rise, falls, you know, on a sort of large temporal scale. How do you mark events which are completely sort of off the chart? Like, for instance, 2014 or something in China, there was like 3.6 billion people moving at one go for the Chinese New Year. This was completely unprecedented in human history. 3.4 billion, that's right. Which means basically the entire country is just churning at one go. And this is completely unprecedented and only on trains. Or like, and why I'm asking this is because you said it very nicely a little while ago about things being, sometimes things are just an image issue. And yesterday in Jibesh's presentation, he talked about that $4 trillion dip. Was it 4 or $5 trillion? $4.5 trillion dip. And there's no image for it. We're just constantly talking about like late capitalism and all these things. So how does one figure that, those kind of moments within your study? How does one relate to it? And I think it's also a nice question to think about even for all sorts of other studies of how does one mark an event?
Cities can do a certain can go up to certain limits. I mean, for example, 2005 floods. City, that is unprecedented. Nowhere in the world the cities can take up that amount of water. I mean, it's not possible. So it breaks down. Before that, every season there are at least 4 days where the city stops. It kind of, it floods every year and people are used to it and kind of, it's like, so there are certain events when cities just can't take it. They kind of, they're like things which, they're like, the Ganesh Murti drinking, milk. Like certain things which happen, which do not have those, which city cannot kind of, in its form and its physicality and itself, it just crumbles. But then it's the in your way of thinking. Disaster management cells. So that's why, I mean that's the way cities are coming to terms with it. But I think they will take time. The Ganesh festival. There are 1 lakh pandals on the 5th day. There are 2 lakhs on the 7th day. There are more than 3 lakhs on the 10th day. The whole of it is organized with complete private money, completely kind of, organized within communities, very, highly gendered spaces, very kind of, segregated spaces, all of it. Promises to come every year, city prepares for it. It's very problematic, but it's also very interesting. Cities kind of, have those things. So cities take up those things. So cities prepare sometimes, and then it takes a long time for them to kind of prepare. But some events, just cracks them.
Hi. I just want to comment about the IIT Madras thing. One of the biggest, IIT Madras has 98% Brahmin professors. And it's not upper caste, just Brahmin professors. So it's not a surprise that it is indeed a temple of modern India, only meant for Brahmins. And therefore, the spatiality of the space, it's that caste. Now, coming back to your presentation, I'm thinking, as an anthropologist, there's a lot of work on the kind of data that you presented. And it's quite interesting to see how, as architect/artist, you're transforming. And what I saw in your work was a certain degree of, and I appreciate that there's a celebration of the messiness that such an urban space like Bombay produces. And there has been a lot of conversation about that messiness or the incoherence that you speak about in anthropological discourses for nearly about 30 years, especially in urban anthropology. Now, my question to you is resonates with what Rosalind is talking about, is that there's a deep-seated problem with the city, and there's so many of that. And I'm wondering how in your work, this neoliberal, hyper-right-wing, late capitalist, post-colonial city, how does it emerge in your artwork? I did not see that. And I was wondering, are you thinking in a way that, in the sense that, is your artwork or the work that you're doing seems celebratory, and I appreciate that.
You know,
Is there a possibility of having a critical formation?
We were in a the last thing I'll say. So we were in 2005, 4, 5. I think we worked as activists, against developers. So there was a series of cases that we were in the courts. We were kind of doing planning with the government officials, all kinds of things. So cases after cases where we see that developers trying to take away land, which is either old chawls or slum areas, and there are these communities who kind of come to us, and that was when CRIT was kind of very active. And we were constantly making court cases and arguments. And this is one story that I want to kind of say, which kind of shifts a lot of what we did subsequently. We met this person, he's Chembur Chawl, and then there's a developer who's kind of Narayan Rane's kind of person who kind of trying to take away that piece of property. And is a 100 tenement person, and then we met this person who's basically he works with he makes machines to make velvet, so he assembles machines. And the velvet making machines are these kind of they're not regular and everywhere, they're kind of they happen once in a while. So he has no permanent job as such. He goes to people who kind of wherever he's asked for. So sometimes he's in Vapi, sometimes in Surat, sometimes Nagar, Aman Nagar, etc., etc. And then you have this you have this a guy who's kind of and then China is already kind of entered with its machines, so no longer people are assembling machine but buying machines from China. So we have this character of who's dispossessed labor, completely informal, at a threat of global capital taking over his life, and then local capital kind of taking over his property and asset. Our perfect protagonist, and we start interviewing him, and we kind of start talking to him, and then we talk to him about for a long number of hours and many days later on. And then when we speak to him, he kind of he's not interested in our questions. What he wants to say is his story of how he likes to find people who are lost in the city. And for the last 40 years, he comes from a community which is kind of very, North Canada, extremely orthodox place, where people from his community want to kind of, enter the city and disappear because they don't want to go back to the families. He likes to find those people who disappear in the city. He likes to kind of, move and get them connected to their families, even if they don't want to. So and then we start looking at his house. It's full of these very cheap magnifying glasses, pens which write in invisible ink, and these kind of things. He's seeing himself as a spy, and person after person whom we meet, after that, we find person after person with these amazing trips. This, one person wants to walk to Hajj, tried 14 times, got arrested 4 times, sent back. He's a security guard at some construction yard. We meet them. He tells he wants our help. We said, what do you want to do? He wants our help to walk to Hajj. Then we ask him, do you know what it means? He says, yeah, I have a plan of 400 days, and these are the cities I'll go through. He's written to Government of India several times. Government of India has answered. Some deputy secretary has answered saying that they will facilitate a flight ticket. Government of India. It's kind of hammered them really. Now this guy persists, in doing that, and then we ask him, वहाँ पर तो जंग चल रही है, क्यों जाना है वहाँ से? तो he says, जंग तो वो लोग कर रहे हैं, मुझे हज करना है, मुझे क्या, And then he goes on to kind of, then we get completely frustrated, say that, somebody is giving you a flight ticket, just take it and go. Say that, मुझे बनावटी हवा में नहीं, कुदरती हवा में जाना है. Yeah, this is the energy of the city. This is the energy of the city.
Translate the last.
And city runs with this energy, this madness. So you can't kind of, put it under the brackets of late capitalism or neoliberal. There are these patterns.
So the reason I responded is I really appreciate these stories because we see these stories all across. I mean, as a matter of fact, an anthropologist friend of mine said that every biography is written is a scandalous biography. But I'm just responding to what you presented. You presented within the vocabulary and lexicon of labor, big cities, how it is transforming. So I'm wondering how that. I mean, I really liked your presentation. It began very critically, but it shifted gears. So I'm wondering why does in your body of work that critical acumen that you have accumulated, how does it reflect in the work that you produce?
Yeah, I think I just kind of answer. I mean, in some ways, what happens is that our own practices actually started with this very, activist practices that were looking at the idea of rights. But one thing that we realized is that moment the rights started becoming clearer and clearer, it was much more easy for capital to come and occupy those. Yeah, and so in some ways, what we're talking about is really kind of somehow bypassing that logic of capital, which is almost impossible to come and take over. So I think that's where we locate ourselves. That where, in some ways, it's like a
there is a mortality to power.
There's another funny thing that I must tell you, my Anurag here. In Gujarat, you're talking about these big cities. In Gujarat, there are villages where, like Rosalind said about communities being segregated depending on their religion, whether they're Jains and things. There are communities where, in a village called Dharmaj, where I have friends there, if you're not Patel, you can't buy property there. And everything there is controlled by them in a certain way that, it's an alcohol-free state, but they would build movie theaters there and have parties there with alcohol at night, and police is not allowed to come there because it's all controlled in a certain way. So when it's money there in a certain way, they're just controlling it in such a strong way that even if they're my friends, if I want to buy a piece of land in their village, even village controls it. It's not only big cities, it's everywhere. It's predominantly everywhere in every section of the society, and it still exists very, very strongly.
Yeah.
We're actually completely out of time, so we're going to have one last, hopefully a comment, and then we can wrap up. Yeah, sure.
I would say. Yeah. See, the presentations you all showed, the kind of data or research that you all have, the kind of data you have and the kind of research you must be doing. What I feel, in most of the cities today, urban planning is very ad hoc. If I give an example, those big government housing projects coming in Delhi, they are completely spoiling the open spaces. They are ready to cut trees. Their traffic situation will go out of control. The whole character of the city is changing. So do you all have any projects on the card where you people actually take this out on the road and bring that awareness amongst people, amongst the government? Take it on a much larger scale. People need to know what's happening. I feel the future is just getting spoiled. It requires a lot more...
there are a lot of people who do that actually. So we felt that we should do something else which a lot of people don't do. The thing with Gujarat is, and this is interesting because I think that will be important for this audience. Gujarat, there is something called the town planning schemes, which is basically kind of tries to remove multiple occupancy. See, Indian state, various states recognized and legitimized multiple claims on land. So under various laws, slum acts and rent control acts and various kinds of tenure rules, one piece of land can be claimed by many people. Town planning schemes require erasure of laws, erasure of such claims, and make it single claim, because then you can operate, then the banks can come in. Gujarat state, between 2002 and 2012, has the highest number of town planning schemes, the only state in India. town planning schemes, which is basically, clearing tenure. So you know the orientation of the state very clearly in terms of what the planning is, and if planning is that clarity of the of land and tenure and property, then that is not the real, that is not the, it requires a lot of violence to kind of get through that, and probably we need other ways of looking at planning. Thank you.